among them. How debate over abortion rights will influence turnout. A ballot question in Kansas will give us a clue. Election denialism. Republicans parroting falsehoods about the 2020 election are seeking big jobs. Is this a GOP fault line? How will attitudes about the economy, specifically inflation, affect turnout and enthusiasm? Will former President Trump be an asset or liability for the GOP? Are President Biden's low poll numbers toxic for Democrats? All of this will flow through races for governor, the U.S. Senate, U.S. House, and important state election administration positions. And remember this. Republicans need only 4 seats in November to win control of the U.S. House and just 1 seat to shift control of the U.S. Senate. A power change in either chamber will slam the brakes on the Biden agenda and kick off hostile investigations, changing the policy and tone of national politics. There's another theme tonight, impeachment grievance. 3 House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump are facing primary challenges. And of course, there is the continuing proxy war between Trump and former Vice President Pence, where their endorsements differ as part of Pence's pursuit of a new post-Trump political identity. Now, we're going to take stock of all of this and dive into the new CBS News Battleground tracker. Our election data team has its first U.S. House estimate and a brand new analysis of potential control of the U.S. Senate. Now, it's just after 9 p.m. here on the East Coast. We have some vote totals, so let's take a look. So in Kansas, on that amendment question dealing with abortion, right now, no, 63.9%, yes, 36.3%. To clarify, yes means giving the legislature access to rewrite law in Kansas about abortion access. No means leave things as they are under the current constitutional amendment. Let's shift now to Kansas governor's race on the Republican side. In the primary, Derek Schmidt, we are looking at about 9% of the vote in, 75%. Arlen Briggs, 25%. Shifting now to Kansas Democratic governor. That primary, I believe we have a projection. Yes, indeed, we do. Laura Kelly, according to CBS, the projected winner, Kansas Democratic gubernatorial primary. Shifting to Michigan and the Republican primary there, very crowded field. Currently, Tudor Dixon, endorsed by former President Trump, with about 12% of that vote in, 43.2%. The rest of the Republican field you can see. Shifting now to Missouri Senate, we're going to do both the Republicans and Democrats. Republicans first, just a tiny percent of the vote in, about 4%. Eric Schmidt, one of 2 Erics in this race to have received a pseudo endorsement from former President Trump, with 40%. Vicky Hartzler, 26%. Eric Greitens, the other Eric who might have received an endorsement. Remember, former President Trump just said he was endorsing Eric. That's where the Republican primary for the Senate in Missouri currently stands. On the Democratic side, Trudy Bush Valentine. Bush, yes, that is, if it appears familiar, definitely related to Anheuser-Busch, 49.9%. Lucas Kunce, 27.6%, with about 5% of the vote in. That's what we have right now in terms of early vote. Not early vote in the sense of mail voting, but early results in tonight's election. CBS News Elections and Survey Director Anthony Salvanto joins me now, and he has the latest results from our new CBS poll. So, Anthony, first question. If you can, tell the audience what primary voters this evening might be looking for.
Good evening, Major. So the answer to that question on the Republican side is one of those big themes that you laid out at the top of the show, and that is election denialism. Candidates talking about 2020. For Republican candidates, we asked people, does that matter? Do you want to hear people talk about it? And look at what we found. If a candidate says that Joe Biden did not win the 2020 election, for Republican voters, they are by 45 to 12 more likely to vote for them. So that impact, discussing 2020, the election denialism, promoting those ideas, of course, unfounded, disproven, that Joe Biden did not win. That's why you hear so much dialogue about that on the Republican side, because it pays off on the Republican side for primary voters. Now, let me show you this as well, because it's related. If a Republican candidate criticizes the January 6th events, look at this balance. Only 19% of Republican voters saying that would make them more likely to vote. 42%, though, saying it would make them less likely to pick that candidate. So, Major, as we look at these races, it's not just tonight, it's throughout these primaries. You're talking about the direction of the Republican Party, the kinds of candidates they're picking and what they're talking about. This is the voter payoff and why you see that dialogue taking place, Major.
Classic example, Anthony, of is it what voters expect or what you say that leads the conversation? Question 2. So this is related. Former President Trump's impact tonight.
Okay, so we asked very directly, if Donald Trump endorses a candidate, what does that do? Look at this balance, 57%, a straight majority of Republican registered voters say that would make them more likely to vote for a candidate. Now, we've seen already in these primaries, he's got a good but not perfect track record of endorsing candidates and those candidates going on to win. But we do see an effect. Candidates will get a boost in the polls after he makes an endorsement. We'll get another test of that tonight. But this is a proxy measure for the continuing impact of the former president, who, by the way, I would add, also Republican primary voters say they think he's fighting for their issues even more than their party in Congress. So he is still definitely a force in the party.
That's Anthony at the big board. He will be back there to break down our CBS News Battleground tracker just a little bit later. But now I've got this fantastic political panel right next to me, and I want to meet, well, I don't need to meet them. I just want to talk to them. So Nancy Cordes, our senior White House correspondent, Robert Costa, elections correspondent extraordinaire, Nicole Killian from our congressional correspondent. So Nancy, let me start with you.
Yes.
What are you looking for tonight? Very simple question.
I am going to be looking for how much of an animating issue abortion truly is. Does it drive Democratic voters in particular to the polls? The White House has to hope that it is. That is probably the only way they are going to kick the traditional midterm curse that every party in power faces in the first election after their party takes power. They lose seats in the House, in the Senate. Can they keep from seeing that happen this time around?
You're there every day. How do they think they're doing on that?
Well, I don't think that they might argue they're doing well, but I don't think that the grades have been very good from activists in the party who feel that the White House should be much more forward-leaning on the issue, should try to, to test the limits of presidential power. At this point, the White House has kind of nibbled around the edges. They argue they can't do much more than that with executive action, but that's deeply dissatisfying for Democrats who've seen abortion rights roll way back.
They would
for the
like
first
a little
time in
bit
50
more bully
years.
pulpit.
They would.
Bob Costa, what are you looking for?
If you were Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer tonight or Senate Republican Leader Mitch McConnell, you're watching who emerges out of these Senate Republican primaries, because the candidates on the ballot in November are going to say so much about who ends up winning the majority.
Because after tonight, the key races for the Senate will really be settled. We're going to know what the landscape is across the country after tonight, right?
That's right. There's a couple primaries left.
But the big ones are tonight. The big ones. In addition to ones that have already been settled.
That's exactly right. And what we're all watching tonight is Greitens versus Schmidt in Kansas.
In Missouri, the two
Excuse me, Missouri. And what you see in Missouri is Democrats wouldn't mind if Eric Greitens was the nominee, because it makes Missouri a winnable state. This is a seat that was represented for years by Senator Roy Blunt, and they see this as a possible pickup if someone like Greitens, who has been accused repeatedly by his ex-wife of domestic abuse and many other things that we don't need to get into, but are very troubling, to say the least.
Nicole Killian, what are you looking for?
I think sticking with some of the congressional races, specifically looking at these three Republicans who voted to impeach former President Trump, and whether or not they'll be able to hold on to their job. You know, we know that there were 10 Republicans who voted to impeach the former president in the House, and most of them have either retired, or they've decided, not to seek re-election. And so consequently, and those who have been up for races have had a very hard-fought battle. So I think tonight we're going to see three running again, and whether or not they survive, I think, will be critical to seeing what impact the former president has in some of these House races.
On this pivotal primary night, Arizona is on the board. The polls are still open there. It will play a key role for Republicans in their hopes that Bob Costa just referred to a second ago of trying to retake control of the Senate. We have correspondents out in the field this evening. One of them is Ed O'Keefe. He's in Scottsdale. Ed, what do you got?
Major, good evening. We're at the campaign rally site of Kari Lake, the former TV news anchor turned gubernatorial candidate who has the support of former President Trump, and many believe it's hers to lose tonight. She faces Karen Robson, who is a business executive backed by former Vice President Mike Pence, who says that Lake is too extreme and runs the risk of having Republicans lose the governor's seat in November. Classic sort of Trump versus Pence, MAGA versus everybody else contest, similar to the ones we've seen across the country country, and a good indicator potentially to the point we were making earlier about candidate quality, whether someone like Kari Lake can get into a general election against a Democrat and hold on in a state that traditionally relies on independents to finally decide big, close races. The other one to watch here in Arizona tonight, the Republican primary for Senate, Blake Masters, who has the support of the former president, and the billionaire tech entrepreneur Peter Thiel is expected to prevail in a race that includes a few other election deniers. And then there's a Secretary of State race, and that one is critical here, as it is in other states, because the Secretary of State runs elections. The candidate to watch in that case is a state senator, Mark Fincham, who didn't get the official complete and total endorsement written pledge from former President Trump, but got his verbal support at least. And he, too, is somebody who has said the elections was stolen in 2020. And there's concern that if he were to somehow win the race in November, that he could slow down the count or throw it into doubt in 2024. So big races out here. But, of course, Arizona doesn't post results until 11 o'clock local time. So it's a later night out here in the Grand Canyon State. We'll be watching to see what happens.
And I'm very glad you brought up this entire question of election denialism, because it's a competition there among Republicans. Arizona had a close presidential election. It was looked at once, twice. It was even looked at by outsiders who had an axe to grind. And no one found anything conclusive to overturn or even question the other results, the original results. And yet, Republicans keep competing with one another to bark election denialism claims. And Kari Lake, as you said, might be the front runner, said recently, if she doesn't win, then that's proof that this election was rigged or somehow taken from her. And so for those Republicans who say, well, we're just talking about election integrity, there are no real dangers here. Actually, there are. If you preemptively say an election is phony unless you win, you're trying to tear down the process. What kind of reaction has that gotten?
Well, look, she has said, Kari Lake has said, if there's an even playing field, then we're going to have a fair election. You ask people like her to define what is even playing field, what's a fair election, and you're going to get a different answer than others, and that's part of the problem. There is concern from other Republicans, other than her, that if she were for some reason to lose tonight, would she concede, or would she find a way to drag this out longer? And if she is the nominee, what would she do in November if she were to lose? You're going to potentially see here in Arizona and in other states sort of state-level versions of what we saw in 2020, and that is the concern that many Republicans, Democrats, other independent observers have about the ongoing concerns and threats to integrity of American elections.
Ed O'Keefe, thanks so much. We'll come back to you. Now, as we mentioned off the top, one of the most closely watched votes tonight will be in the state of Kansas. Voters there will be the first in the nation to have their say on whether abortion should remain constitutionally protected in the state after the landmark abortion ruling Roe v. Wade was overturned most recently here in June. For more on all this, I want to go to Caitlin Huey-Burns, who is in Overland Park, Kansas. Caitlin Huey-Burns, tell us how that's going, what the contours of this question are, and what you're seeing.
Hey, Major. Well, this on the ground, as we've been reporting for the past couple of days, feels kind of bigger than a presidential race, according to voters that we've been talking to, because this issue is among the most divisive in the country, and voters here are extremely engaged. We've seen early vote turnout surge compared to the past midterms, and you're seeing on your screen the early results of this ballot measure so far. We were told by a member of the group that is holding the event where we are today that is supportive of this amendment, which would essentially remove protections in the state constitution for abortion rights and then kick it over essentially to the legislature to be able to design laws restricting measures. They were saying that they expected this early return to favor the no vote because the early precincts and those who are turning in their vote early favor that. So you could see a real tightening in that vote here soon. But this is a really key test nationally for whether Democrats essentially can galvanize their voters around the issue of abortion rights and also attract independent voters around this issue as well. That's something that we're watching heading into November and something that could potentially help Democrats. But on the ground here, we've been talking to voters on both sides of this issue, activists on both sides of this issue, and lawmakers here. And they have just been telling us how much this matters to them. I spoke to one woman at a voting location earlier today who said that she would crawl through glass to make it to this vote. And what's interesting is there are primaries happening here, but they're not very competitive. The number one driver for people turning out today is this ballot measure that they say will send messages beyond Kansas.
Caitlin, thanks so much. And it's just worth pointing out that when voters say an August 2nd primary feels like a national election, you know something very big is coming down the pike. When we come back, CBS News' exclusive Battleground Tracker. We will take a look at where the race for control of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate currently stands.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming free speech.
It's evident that there's a wave of censorship across the nation.
Angry partisan debate in schools.
College campuses have not been a place of intellectual diversity for the longest time now.
Are loud voices silencing a generation.
I don't feel comfortable speaking out.
I started to realize I wasn't even discussing stuff in class. I was keeping all my thoughts to myself.
Are the kids all right? Free speech. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time. Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before. That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Welcome back. As promised, we want to be rejoined by Anthony Salvanto, who has with him his trusty CBS News House and Senate Battleground Tracker. But first, Anthony, you've got some stuff for us on Kansas. Catch us up. Where are we?
But first I do. This is a live news show, so let me show you this. We've got the Kansas abortion amendment here, and no is out to a sizable percentage early lead here at 64-35. And I just want to show you the places where you've got colors here, the blue for yes and the orange for no, are counties where we've got vote in. So there's about a third in. And by the way, I should say, we're expecting at least 800,000 votes in here. That could be up to half of registered voters. So right now at the decision desk, we're expecting big turnout. And the other thing I want to show you is the key is going to be up here in the northeastern part of the state, suburbs around Kansas City. If I overlay this area with the 2020 general election, the blue area is more Democratic. What I'm expecting to see is that more no votes coming from these regions. So that's a way to watch this going forward as we go through the night, Major. This is getting pretty interesting. As you see, we got about a third in and big turnout.
Excellent. So we have a distinctive Battleground tracker here at CBS News. Very proud of it. You helped build it, Anthony. Talk to us about the House estimate.
Okay, so everybody wants to watch these House races in terms of seats. Yes, national polling is nice, but this is a 435-seat contest. So what we bring you is interviews with voters across all of these districts, put that in a model, and show you, here's the current House, and here's where it stands right now. Watch this center, because the Republicans are going to stand to take over. And you see that little bit of movement. Gain of 16 seats right here. And then the bigger story, Major, is stay focused here on the middle of the House, because most seats, the blue for Democrats, the Republicans in here in red, are not going to move. You've got 90% of voters who've made up their mind. You've got gerrymandering. You've got safe seats. This is all locked in. But it's going to be these seats in the middle. And I estimate right now, maybe not more than, say, 70 out of 435, and that's at the outside, are going to be competitive. This is the narrow middle. These are the swing seats that you and I and everybody are going to watch all fall, Major.
And do you have something for us, Anthony, regarding the Senate and its future?
Why, I am glad you asked, Major, because here's the current Senate, and here are the seats up. Everybody should know to set the table. You've got 35 seats, blue for Democrats, red for Republicans. Yes, the Republicans are defending more seats, but when you look at the ones that are up, you've got a lot of, and everybody's watching this, political junkies are going to know, I'm going to call out the names of some battleground states. Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Get to know some of these names, because these are the toss-ups. These are the states that could go either way, and we're going to be watching these all the way through election night in November. You're going to find some household names here. I'll show you, Pennsylvania, Fetterman against Oz. We're going to really cover that one. You're going to look at Georgia. This one is going to draw national attention. Warnock, the incumbent, against former running back Herschel Walker on the Republican side. All of these are examples of states, and of course Arizona, which we're going to see tonight, are examples of places, Senate races, that are going to determine control of the Senate, which overall is a toss-up, Major.
So in your surveys, did you find issues that voters are adamantly concerned about presently?
Yeah, very simple, to be honest with you. It's the economy, right? It's the economy. It is inflation. That is a big, big deal. I'm going to scroll over and I'm going to show you this slide, which will tell you the story right there. Very important issue, what I just said. 83% economy, 79% inflation. And one of the reasons this is important, well, two reasons this is important. One is that Republicans are winning the people who think that these things are top problems and that the state of the economy isn't good. That swings some seats. But the second one is juxtapose that against what we're looking at tonight, where the dialogue among the base voters of these parties is talking about other issues than this. And that helps create that disconnect between what people are after and what some of the more ideological base voters are after in a campaign.
Anthony Salvanto, our thanks to you. We'll be back to you for more on key races that could decide, as Anthony just helped us see, House and Senate control. Joined now by Republican political analyst Leslie Sanchez and Democratic political contributor Joel Payne. So, Leslie, what are you seeing tonight, and what have you seen so far this year, either consistent or in some ways slightly different from what Anthony Salvanto just talked to us about?
On the consistent part, Major, you can draw a straight line between the economy, battleground states, and the impact that they're having, especially on some of these highly contested states. The economy, the rising prices, inflation. If you ask these voters, they're going to put the responsibility and the blame on Biden. While we know we're going to expect that the president in power would have some losses in a midterm, especially with such high unfavorables in the 37-seat range, the Republican wins could possibly be much smaller. And a lot of that has to do with what you've been talking about, the election deniers and these fissures within the Republican Party. The party is not going to go back to the genteel or aristocratic style of the Bush era, or even the late Senator Bob Dole. We're talking so much about Kansas, and you think of those big rivalries, many, in the last turn of the century. This time, it is much more Tea Party oriented, populist oriented, against establishment, what the party used to look like. And the MAGA Tea Party types are winning. So tonight we're going to see just by what those margins look like, and shifting to economy. Is that going to be enough for these outlier candidates?
Joel, I want to ask you what you see on the Senate map, because really that does seem to be the heart and center of this midterm election conversation for Democrats. There is a sense they're going to lose control of the House, but a fighting chance to preserve or possibly even expand their Senate majority. Do you see that?
That's right, Major. I mean, look, candidates matter. I think Bob said it earlier. You referred to it earlier. I think that the candidates here across the country for Republicans are the only thing that could blow a pretty favorable political circumstance that they're in right now. You look at Georgia already with Herschel Walker. He's a tough candidate for Republicans to run with in a state where they've got a model Republican candidate in Brian Kemp that they could follow. You're looking at a place like Arizona tonight where you're looking at very extreme candidates that might be at the head of the ticket there. That's going to impact their ability to reach out to independents and moderates, and ultimately their chance to build a winning coalition. I worked in the Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid's office in 2010. He was in a very similar tough electoral circumstance, and he had a favorable candidate to run against. That's the only thing that saved him and a lot of Democrats that cycle. So that's one thing. Another thing, Major, I'm looking at really, really quickly, in Kansas, you talk about that abortion ballot initiative that's up. It's going to really change that electorate that normally shows up in like an off-year type of race in a state like Kansas. And it's not going to be progressives, by the way, if that goes down. If ultimately those abortion rights are protected in Kansas, it's going to be independents, moderates, people from those sleepy suburban communities that Anthony talked about on the calendar, rather on the map, outside of Kansas City, right on the border of Missouri, that's going to actually push that over the edge if the folks who are supportive of abortion rights are able to save that tonight. So that's something else I'm watching tonight as well.
Joel Payne, thanks so very much. My thanks also to Leslie Sanchez. We'll be back to you. And we'll be right back as more votes keep coming in, and we'll have some new results very shortly. I'm Major Garrett. See you in a minute.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Free Speech.
It's evident that there's a wave of censorship across the nation.
Angry partisan debate in schools.
College campuses have not been a place of intellectual diversity for the longest time now.
Are loud voices silencing a generation.
I don't feel comfortable speaking out.
I started to realize I wasn't even discussing stuff in class. I was keeping all my thoughts to myself.
Are the kids all right? Free Speech. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time. Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital.
We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Welcome back to our CBS News special report, America Decides Campaign 22. Courtesy time check, 9:30 p.m. here on the East Coast. Let's take a look at some of the latest results coming into our election desk. Going back to Kansas, starting with that question on abortion. No, 63%, 36% yes. So I see on the board there about 38% of the vote in. Quick explainer, no means keep the status quo, constitutional protections within Kansas for abortion right. Yes, green lights the legislature to amend and rewrite the state constitution, in likelihood restricting in some manner or form abortion rights in Kansas. So 63% to 36% with about a third of the vote in. Now heading to Kansas governor's Republican primary, Derek Schmidt, 77%, Alvin Briggs, 22%. Kansas, that is a projected winner. Thank you very much, Dave Ryder, in my ear. Projected winner on the Republican side. Shifting now to the Democratic side of the same question, Kansas governor, Democratic primary, Laura Kelly, projected winner from the CBS desk. Shifting now to Michigan. I believe Michigan is next. Indeed, it is. Republican primary for governor for the right to take on incumbent Gretchen Whitmer. Tudor Dixon, 42%, and the remainder of the field there with about just under, if I read that correctly, about 40% of the vote in. Michigan House primary 3, this is what we flagged for you earlier. Peter Meyer, Grand Rapids area, currently running behind John Gibbs. Peter Meyer voted to impeach President Trump and therefore drew the former president's ire. Next up, Missouri Senate primary. Eric Schmidt, just under 43%. Vicky Hartzler, 24%. Eric Greitens, 19%. Billy Long, way back at 4%, with about 19% of the vote in. Again, reminder, two Erics endorsed there, neither with their last name. It was a pick'em for Republican voters because former President Trump never gave a surname to the Eric he was endorsing. The Missouri Senate Democratic primary. Trudy Bush Valentine still leading the field there, about 11% in. Yes, she is related and attached to the Anheuser-Busch family. I believe, do we have a Missouri House race? Yes, indeed. House District 1, Cori Bush, challenged, as you can see, by several. Some of those describe themselves as more moderate Democrats. Cori Bush, comfortable lead there. I want to return to the table. Bob Costa, I want to ask you, Joel Payne was talking about the Senate map. You talk to Senate Republicans all the time. You know a bunch of money is being pushed into the table, and they are feeling the brunt of some less than perfect Republican candidates. I think that's being charitable. Are they getting anxious about the way this cycle is progressing or maybe regressing?
Not so much tonight when they look at Eric Schmidt in Missouri, right, and they saying, hey, look, he's going to be okay. But in general, there's some nervousness across the board about the candidates they're nominating. But what's so intriguing about the results to me tonight is Peter Meyer in Michigan going down, had the impeachment vote for then President Trump. Just in a few weeks, what are we paying attention to? Congresswoman Liz Cheney, vice chair of the January 6th committee, faces a similar primary challenge in Wyoming. Not a good omen for that wing of the Republican Party.
Peter Meyer trailing, not projected yet, but trailing, and that's worth noting. Nicole, what are you seeing?
Well, I think just to pick up on that point, as we talked about at the top of the show, I mean, I think that is a critical element because as we have pointed out throughout the evening, you know, all roads, it seems, lead through the former president, or perhaps not. But, you know, again, in the case of these Republicans who took a stand, what does that say if they're leaving their jobs or if they're getting voted out? And I think, you know, in terms of talking to members on the Hill, the concern is who then fills that vacuum, right? And I think that is the unknown, and that is why some of these races, both in Michigan and Washington State, are so critical.
Nancy, I want to ask you about something that happened this evening in a debate up in New York. Carolyn Maloney, a senior high-ranking House Democrat, said she doesn't believe President Biden's going to run for re-election. She's now the third House Democrat within the last week or so, either expressing outright opposition or pretty serious on-the-record doubts about this question. You're at the White House every day. Everyone around the president talks about this, whether they want to or not, because all of you ask about it. What's the temperature?
Well, I don't think she's the last Democrat who's going to express either some doubt about the possibility that he'll run again, given his age, or some doubt about whether he should be the nominee. But the reality is, as long as he is running, and all indications I get are that he is, this is something, as you know, having covered him on the Hill, he has been wanting to do his entire adult life, is run for president and be president. I don't see him changing his mind about that. And if a few more Democrats come out and say they don't think he should be the nominee, either because they're running in a tight race and they think that'll be beneficial to them, or because they truly believe it, the White House knows that that goes with the territory. The reality is nobody is going to step up and run against him. No major potential candidate is going to step up and run against him in a primary if he decides he wants to be the nominee.
Very good, Nancy. Arizona was crucial to President Biden's victory. It was close, but it was not overturnable, and everyone looked at it, and it's totally legit. But it's an important part of the national story in 2020, and will be an important part of the national story in 2022. So the House Speaker there, Rusty Bowers, is running for the state Senate, and he's facing a very tough election fight. This comes after Bowers, as you might recall, testified before the January 6th committee about the pressure campaign he felt from former President Trump to overturn the aforementioned 2020 presidential election. Ed O'Keefe is there, and he spoke with Bowers ahead of today's primary. Ed?
Major, good to see you again. We're at Kerry Lake's campaign headquarters. But Rusty Bowers, pretty good example of how far down the ballot former President Trump is reaching, not just in this state, but across the country. He's endorsed more than 200 candidates nationwide, and one of them is the opponent of Rusty Bowers in this state Senate race. He, as you said, is the Speaker of the House, term limited, trying to go back to the state Senate where he had initially served. This is somebody who has spent about 30 years in public service here in Arizona, pretty, traditional conservative Republican. We had a chance to speak with him inside the House chambers here in Arizona. We weren't expecting for him to do this, but he's the Speaker, so he has access to it. Took us in there. We talked about his potential fate, and we asked him about his chances. Take a listen. If you lose, is it a direct result of the former president's endorsement of your opponent?
Oh, there's no doubt that he got a big boost. Almost every candidate that he endorsed got a boost. I think all in all, it will be a residual of my appearance, and it'll be residuals of this ongoing steal. It's a myth, and it's unsupported by any fact that I've ever been able to find. But either way, they are the voters. They will decide, and they will inherit whatever they do.
So that's part of what Speaker Rusty Bowers told us. He has said at different times he thinks he might lose. To us, he said he thinks he could win today. We will wait and see what exactly the results are. But if he goes down, another big example of somebody targeted by the former president after getting caught up in his crosshairs and knowing full well when he testified to the committee that this might happen, but facing the wrath of Trump-inspired or Trump-aligned Republican voters in this big primary today. Major.
Arizona is not going to be the only barometric guide to the pressure of the big lie. Results of the Secretary of State races in Arizona and Michigan could also be part of that barometric reading, and they would have a big impact on the administration, meaning the handling and certification of the presidential election in 2024. One Republican candidate, Michigan's Trump-endorsed Christina Caramo, has endorsed the big lie. Former President Donald Trump's false claim, of course, that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen. When we come back, we're going to talk to Katie Hobbs, Secretary of State of Arizona, who's running in the Democratic primary for governor. Oh, we're going to stay at the table here. That's my instructions. So coming back to the table, Bob Costa, we have this conversation in the newsroom a lot. You have it on Capitol Hill with regularity. It's my impression, as I talk to Republicans, they have one attitude about the big lie publicly, and they have a quite different attitude privately. Do you detect the same?
What matters is what people do in politics. They can grumble and grouse privately, but politics is a public service, and it's a public enterprise, and the decisions they make about what they say really says a lot about the state of our democracy. Even if they don't agree with the former president and his false claims about the election in 2020, so many of them continue to choose to echo him to some extent. There's a nuance in how they do so, but the echo is there.
And Nicole, you're up there every day, and you've watched every one of the January 6th hearings up close. If Republicans had a concerted, fact-based retort, I would think they'd have competing press conferences or something before or after, a pre-buttal, a post-buttal, something. Have you seen one of those?
Well, it could be coming because we know that there are House Republicans that are conducting their own investigation, if you will, into the events of January 6th and have periodically been putting forth their findings. But that being said, I mean, again, I am still kind of struck by the numbers in our own polling that, 42% of people, Republican voters, are less likely to vote for someone who criticizes the events of January 6th. And I think that was such a big question for the committee as they started these hearings. Would they be able to change minds? And the reality of it is perhaps not. And we're seeing that play out in some of these races even tonight. And so, again, that just goes to the larger question of what really matters to voters, which we saw is the economy, inflation. But when it comes to the state of our democracy, and that's certainly an argument many Democrats are making to voters, are hoping that maybe people still have faith in the system and will support their candidates in light of that. And I think that's also why you're seeing some Democratic entities prop up some of these Republican candidates with these far out ideas and theories in the hopes that they can try to turn the tables there. So really, in terms of how these January 6th threads play out, I think are quite fascinating, but also telling at the same time if, in fact, some of these election deniers ultimately get into office.
Leslie Sanchez, let me bring you into this conversation. You do a lot of conversations around the country with Republican voters. How much do they organically bring up questions, indictments, slanders of the 2020 election, or is that something you have to sort of inject to bring out of them? Where does that land in terms of the conversations you regularly have out there?
It's really small, Major. And while I think a lot of people would assume that so many people, eyeballs were watching, especially since it was on prime time and a big part of the national conversation, at least primary voters were not interested in that. They were very much looking at the fact, can they still live the American dream? There's this interesting correlation between Donald Trump and Donald Trump America and their hard work can really deliver their American dream. And by contrast, they think that Biden is taking that away. And if you look at it through that lens, it explains the intensity of why they're out in big numbers today.
Leslie Sanchez, thanks so much. When we come back, Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, I told you before, she's running for the Democratic gubernatorial nominee. She's still doing that. And more results in the important primary states and the abortion vote in Kansas when we come back.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming free speech.
It's evident that there's a wave of censorship across the nation.
Angry partisan debate in schools.
College campuses have not been a place of intellectual diversity for the longest time now.
Are loud voices silencing a generation.
I don't feel comfortable speaking out.
I started to realize I wasn't even discussing stuff in class. I was keeping all my thoughts to myself.
Are the kids all right? Free speech. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
and reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before. That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News.
What's your message to consumers?
They need help now.
Tell them I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Welcome back. We want to go now to Arizona's Democratic Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, who tonight is seeking her party's nomination for governor. Madam Secretary, Arizona was one of 6 crucibles in America after 2020 for the big lie. How has Arizona changed, and how does that change influence the way you're campaigning to become its next governor?
Well, the Republicans are all campaigning on Trump's big lie, even if they're not full-throated endorsers of it. It's certainly playing a role. They have had to embrace these election conspiracy theories to be taken seriously by their Republican base. And it makes me wonder how anyone else can take them seriously as a candidate. But the bottom line is I want to move on from the 2020 election more than anyone. I'm focused on talking to voters across the state about the issues that matter to them, about the problems that we need to tackle on day one, rising costs, our water crisis, fixing our schools, protecting reproductive health care.
Are you satisfied as the future possible Democratic nominee for governor with President Biden's immigration policies in your state and nearby?
Well, I'm encouraged about his recent announcement about completing portions of the border wall in Yuma. I think that will go a long way to address the influx of migrants that we're seeing there. But he needs to do more to enhance border security so that we can make sure we're addressing the smugglers of guns and drugs that are coming across the border and harming our communities. We also need the federal government to step up and finally, once and for all, pass comprehensive immigration reform that provides a tough but fair path to citizenship and stops incentivizing illegal crossings or folks staying illegally overstaying their visas. And so it's a combination of President Biden and Congress and decades of inaction that we've seen from both parties on this issue.
The West has seen another summer of wildfires, drought, and other climate-related challenges. To what effect has that reality, meaning people in your state seeing that around them or nearby, influenced, if at all, the debate on climate change?
Well, it is absolutely impacting every aspect of our lives in Arizona with more wildfires, prolonged droughts, and it's impacting our quality of life and our economy. And we need leaders who are going to take this seriously and have plans to really attack climate change with green energy. And we can do that. I have a plan to do that. You can find that at katiehobbs.org. We're going to tackle these challenges.
Katie Hobbs, Secretary of State of Arizona and candidate for governor on the Democratic ticket. Thanks so much for your time. Just to point out, because it's important, we asked a number of Republican candidates to join us tonight, but they did not make themselves available. We want to go back now to Caitlin Huey-Burns in Kansas, who is tracking races there, the abortion question, and in Missouri. That's a big task, Caitlin. Carry on for us, please.
Hi there, Major. Well, first of all, the abortion debate here, the abortion ballot measure, has felt like, as I mentioned, a presidential kind of race. You haven't had a lot of competitive primaries here in Kansas, but that ballot measure has been the thing that has been driving voters to the polls today. We were at a precinct today. The line was long. People were showing up in the dead of August. It was 100 degrees today. People showing up to vote on that measure. That measure, of course, could have national implications. And when you look at the early returns, that no vote is leading. And that means that a no vote would essentially keep abortion access in place in the state and reject the effort to overturn or amend the constitutional protections in the state of Kansas for abortion. That would be a huge win, of course, for Democrats who are looking to Kansas as a way to measure how and why voters might be mobilized on this issue. Now, right across the border from where we are, we're in the Kansas City suburbs, right across the border in Missouri. Of course, there's been a very competitive Republican primary for the U.S. Senate to fill the seat of outgoing Senator Roy Blunt. And that's where we've been watching the power of the Trump endorsement, or the kind of ambiguous Trump endorsement. There, he endorsed a candidate named Eric, but didn't say which one. And now we are seeing that Eric Schmidt is leading in that race. So that is a key race to watch as we're talking about Trump power, but also about candidate quality. Republicans did not want Eric Greitens to be on the top of that ticket.
Caitlin, before I let you go, facts matter here at CBS News, but so do birthdays. Happy birthday to you, Caitlin Huey Burns. CBS News
no place I'd rather be.
CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto comes back to us as promised. Anthony, about 63% as I read, or maybe 61% in Kansas on that abortion question. Is that callable yet? And if not, why not?
It is not callable yet, Major, but as you can see, no has a substantial lead for the moment. I think this very well may tighten. That's what we're talking about here at the decision desk. And for one or two simple reasons. First of all, I want you to look at all this gray space here in the western part of the state. Rural counties, extremely Republican counties. That's where you would expect maybe the yes side to gain. So we're waiting to see more of that. And related, Major, I've got this at 61% in, but that's an estimate, because what we've been seeing in terms of trends when we do see reported votes from all these counties tonight is that turnout is really high. So this could actually change. There could be still more votes still to come. Last reason is that a lot of this is early vote, is absentee vote, and we think that Election Day might also trend more Republican. So we might expect more tightening, but for the moment, it's a lead for no, Major.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much. We will be right back with the latest results from, as you might guess, tonight's primaries.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming free speech.
It's evident that there's a wave of censorship across the nation.
Angry partisan debate in schools.
College campuses have not been a place of intellectual diversity for the longest time now.
Are loud voices silencing a generation.
I don't feel comfortable speaking out.
I started to realize I wasn't even discussing stuff in class. I was keeping all my thoughts to myself.
Are the kids all right? Free speech. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time. Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Welcome back. We promised additional primary results, and we aim to deliver. We have a projection in Michigan for the Republican governor's race. Tudor Dixon is the projected winner, according to the CBS News elections desk, beating out 4 other Republican challengers. She will take on Gretchen Whitmer, who did not have any Democratic opponents in the primary. And Republicans tell me that Tudor Dixon, Trump endorsed in that race, the most competitive Republican that could have emerged from that primary. I want to go to Joel Payne. Joel, a couple of thoughts quickly on Michigan, but also on what appears to be a trend in Kansas. We haven't projected, but it's a trend in Kansas that at the table it surprises us. I wonder if it surprises you.
You know, the Kansas piece that we're talking about tonight, I don't know if it surprises me. I think it's pretty predictable if you just kind of look at the politics of the moment. I think that obviously a lot of independents and moderates showed up. I said that a little bit earlier. That's what's going to make the majority in Kansas. That's going to fight back against that abortion amendment. I also think you have to think about Kansas regionally. There's so many surrounding states, Oklahoma, Missouri, Texas, that have near or full abortion bans. So Kansas as this oasis state, I think it plays such a central role in demonstrating what the mood is in the country, particularly in that region of the country related to abortion. And then in Michigan, really, really quickly, I think Gretchen Whitmer, abortion is going to certainly be front and center in that race, but also the 2020 election. Tudor Dixon, who appears to be the Republican nominee, someone who's Trump endorsed, who's very much against abortions in the case of rape and incest. You're going to hear a lot about that. There was a big federal case yesterday. Gretchen Whitmer challenged, Michigan law that was going to make her reverse the abortion ban. I think that's going to take a front and center seat in Michigan as well.
One more Michigan update I want to bring to you. Bring up the board, please, on Peter Meyer. 50 to 49, that has definitely tightened quite a bit.
Yep.
Leslie Sanchez, quickly, your thoughts on that as we see that race tightening with about 31% of the vote in.
A lot of people expected that, Major. This is one where they're following whether the Trump influence was going to help Gibbs here, and it certainly looks like it is right now.
Excellent. Nancy, I want to ask you something. There has been, for the past 2 months, in Washington, for sure, and possibly nationally, a sky is falling motif around the Biden presidency, its poll numbers and its effect on the midterms. And yet, in the last week or so, it is perceptible that things have begun to shift. There are victories on the board. I wonder if there's any bounce in the step at the White House.
You could argue that this was one of the best weeks of the Biden presidency, COVID notwithstanding. I was just jotting down some of the highlights. First off, they took out the leader of al-Qaeda. Gas prices are down 80 cents in the past 6 weeks. Congress just passed a landmark bill to invest in semiconductors, a big priority for President Biden. And then finally, he appears to have struck a deal with the very mercurial Joe Manchin of West Virginia that would usher in the largest climate bill of all time that, oh, by the way, would also allow Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices for the very first time. That's a pretty major list of accomplishments for someone who is still in isolation in the White House residence.
Not to mention Senate Republicans deciding to break glass and then walk all over it in public over the PACT Act and veterans benefits. Bob Costa, your thoughts?
We're less than 100 days before the midterms. I have a motto on my desk upstairs: assume nothing. Look at what's happening in Kansas tonight. Maybe Meyer survives in Michigan or at least makes it close. We have assumptions to shatter in the coming weeks because this is a midterm elections. We just don't know how exactly it's going to unfold.
Very good. Nicole, any thoughts?
Two quick thoughts. I mean, just continuing on the thread with these lawmakers who voted to impeach Trump. Of course, we'll have another test, as Bob mentioned earlier, in Wyoming. We're going into another busy stretch in terms of primaries. And speaking of that, I know we didn't get to the race in Michigan between Andy Levin and Haley Stevens, but I think that's worth pointing out because that also exemplifies some of the redistricting issues that we continue to see across the country, which will also be a big factor as we look ahead to the New York primary, where you you see this Democrat on Democrat, and in some cases Republican on Republican races where quality candidates are being squeezed out and having to battle it back and forth. So just another dynamic to watch going forward.
Ed O'Keefe in Arizona, super unfair. You got 20 seconds.
Maricopa County, 2 words to watch. If you win Maricopa County, you win this primary. That is what I've been told by smart people on both sides, so keep an eye on that. They're wrapping up the prayer here at the Kerry Lake rally. They're praying that she pulls it off tonight. Democrats also praying she's the nominee because they think they got a shot against her in November.
Politics doesn't talk about it, but there are prayers on all sides all the time. Our coverage will continue here on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and tomorrow on CBS Mornings. I want to thank all of our correspondents, Caitlin Huey-Burns in Kansas, Ed O'Keefe in Arizona, as you just saw, and our contributors. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. It's primary night in America. Good night.
Tonight, how far will China go? After Speaker Nancy Pelosi becomes the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit Taiwan in 25 years. The Speaker of the House arrives on a U.S. Air Force plane.